Good evening from Rocky Mountain PBS. I'm Cynthia Hessen. This is Colorado State of Mind. In part 2 tonight, we will talk with Denise Maes, Policy Director for the ACLU of Colorado, and sort through some of the facts and fiction of the National Security Agency story. From hunting Edward Snowden to the revelation the government collects a lot of data that we thought was private. Alicia Caldwell from the Denver Post will join us for that too. But let's begin tonight with Colorado as twister country. Last week there was a scare at Denver International Airport when a tornado touched down, sending everyone at DIA into storm shelters. Luckily, no one was hurt and there was apparently no damage. But that got the iNews team here at Rocky Mountain PBS thinking about all the tornadoes which have happened in Colorado over the past 63 years. Let's take a look at this report by Kevin Vaughan and Joe Mahoney, and then we'll talk more about it.
Only a small strip of Colorado's eastern plains is in the area known as Tornado Alley, but the state is, indeed, twister country. Don't believe it? Consider this. Since 1950, only 6 other states have had more tornadoes than the nearly 2,000 that were documented in Colorado. Those tornadoes resulted in 5 deaths and injuries to nearly 300 people. And while it's true that the number of tornado deaths and injuries in Colorado is modest compared to states like Oklahoma and Missouri, it's also true that some of the twisters of years past that hit open prairie would have different consequences today as a result of growth along the Front Range. Take, for instance, a 1985 twister that hit where Sky Ridge Medical Center stands today, or a 1975 tornado that danced across the land that is now home to Denver International Airport.
There are different kinds of tornadoes. There are what we call supercell tornadoes, which are the ones that people most often think about. They get in the news because they can be extremely powerful, winds up to 300 miles an hour, and they're the ones that are associated most of the time with fatalities and the destruction of towns. Supercell tornadoes can occur in Colorado. There have been some very strong ones recently in Windsor, Colorado, many years ago in Lyman, Colorado. There are also non-supercell tornadoes, and Colorado gets a lot of non-supercell tornadoes. They're the land equivalent of waterspouts. In fact, we call them land spouts in our research business. So Colorado probably has an inflated tornado statistic because it combines land spouts with the supercell tornadoes. Tornadoes are going to occur in eastern Colorado whether there's development out there or not. Tornadoes don't care if they're crossing an open ranch land or if they're crossing a suburb. But as development increases, as urban and suburban sprawl spreads to new areas of eastern Colorado, the chance that people would be impacted by tornadoes gets higher every decade.
And 2 of the state's fastest growing counties, Weld and Adams, have had the most tornadoes since 1950.
Kevin Vaughan and Burt Hubbard join me now from the iNews team for some more details. Burt, where did you get all this information?
We got it from the National Weather Service. They've kept track of tornadoes since 1950. And so we went in and downloaded the list from Colorado, and they really are a lot more common than people think. But the other thing we found was that they're probably some of the least dangerous type of tornadoes. 2/3 were the lowest category of danger.
That's very interesting. Colorado, home of the mild tornadoes. Why is that? Do you know?
A lot of it's the fact that we're not exactly in Tornado Alley. We're sort of on the edge of Tornado Alley, and the proximity of the mountains plays a role in it too.
This was really interesting that the tornado touched down at DIA last week because they've been getting ready for such a thing, trying to, they call it a tabletop exercise?
Exactly. I mean, if you think about the airport, tens of thousands of people go through there every single day. By the airport's estimates, at any given moment, they might have 20,000 or more people on the grounds. And so they need to be able to react because they are on the plains, and tornadoes, you know, they happen in the mountains occasionally here, but they're much more common on the eastern plains. So the airport regularly conducts these exercises where they essentially go through a scenario of a tornado touching down and talk about what they would do to evacuate people into the storm shelters and how they would react.
Where are those? Are they underground or?
Some are underground. They have access to the underground tunnel system if necessary, and then of course, you know, all the bathrooms out there are marked with the tornado shelter signs. If you've been out there, you've seen those. And you know, the biggest thing, step one in anything like this, is to get everybody away from the windows, and then
which is not easy at DIA.
It's not easy, right?
My goodness. So it is pretty interesting. If DIA had been there what year was that?
1975.
All right, so would it have been obliterated? No, because you said it was a mild tornado.
It was actually, that was actually a little bit stronger tornado. The track of it that's available today on the map took it right up into the west parking lot, right next to the main terminal. It's hard to know how much damage there might have been, but it's just interesting to think about the fact that, almost 40 years ago that was open prairie, and today it's a bustling international airport with tens of thousands of passengers going through every day.
There's a similar story with the Douglas County Courthouse.
Yes, back in 1961, there was a tornado that hit right off of I-25 in Douglas County. Actually injured 2 people, but it hit right about where the Douglas County Courthouse and some surrounding motels are today.
This has been, well, we thought it was pretty great last week. Not that the tornado touched down, but that it was right in the middle of us working on this story, right? Or you working on this story. And then, as we do with our iNews model, we made that available to outlets around the state, and we made the front page several places.
Four of the papers along the Front Range: Fort Collins, Greeley, Summit, Durango. So, and they were all on the front pages, and it was a sort of a topical thing, especially because of DIA. That DIA story went around the world.
Yes, because that was pretty interesting to contemplate. Do you think that we are more weather interested in Colorado? I know we have a lot of storm chasers, don't we?
Yes, there are. In fact, unfortunately, a couple got killed in Oklahoma earlier this month in one of the disastrous tornadoes down there. But yeah, we have a lot of people that are studying the storms, and they'll go to the surrounding states and follow them around.
We have, the large research labs along the Front Range that are looking at various things associated with the weather. And I do think that just nearly everyone I know that I talk to about tornadoes finds themselves sort of fascinated and mesmerized by them in a strange kind of way.
To, seeing The Wizard of Oz as a child.
Yeah, exactly.
What is our ranking state, in the number of tornadoes per state?
Only 6 other states have had more tornadoes since 1950. And what's interesting is we've had these 1948 tornadoes, but only 5 people have died during that whole time. So they are, they either been in isolated areas, or else they've been so low velocity that they really haven't done the damage that you would think they would do.
If you look at the Windsor tornado from 2008, that was on the ground for 39 miles,
Yep.
I think, about
Wow.
45 minutes. And that was a pretty large tornado, and it was unusual in a lot of respects. It struck before noon. It moved from the southeast to the northwest, which is not the typical track. And it did, unfortunately, kill 1 person and injured some people. But if you think about a twister of that magnitude, that's pretty incredible that the toll wasn't higher.
Well, let's see. I think you have said that June is tornado season, right? So are we out of it next week?
Well, but July is number 2.
Oh, okay.
So, we still got a big chance. And traditionally what we found is most of the tornadoes do occur between 3 and 7 p.m. So after 7 p.m., you're okay.
Okay.
Generally speaking.
Generally speaking.
Yes, let's not go on the record as saying that's absolute.
Yeah, there have been some anomalies. There was a deadly tornado in the early part of the century that struck at 5 a.m. and there have been tornadoes at midnight. And I think one of the experts that we interviewed said nothing in meteorology is impossible. So
It's unlimited weather, unlimited fascination.
Yes.
Thank you, Kevin Vaughan and Burt Hubbard of the iNews at Rocky Mountain PBS team. You can see more of their report online at rmpbs.org. Just look on the homepage for the tornado link. Now, let's turn to the NSA story, which has seemed like an international thriller rather than news over the past few weeks. President Obama announced this week he's not going to devote a lot of resources to tracking down and arresting Edward Snowden. That's the whistleblower who lifted the veil on PRISM, the National Security Agency's program for collecting all sorts of information from the internet and our communications on the internet. Denise Maes is Policy Director for the ACLU of Colorado. She has worked at the White House and is an expert on the Patriot Act and many privacy issues. And Alicia Caldwell joins us tonight as well from the Denver Post. This has a big Colorado connection because our Senator Mark Udall is on this.
That's right. Mark Udall is on the Senate Intelligence Committee, and he and Ron Wyden, who are of like mind on some of these national security issues, have made it part of their mission to do what they can. They're in a delicate position. They can't really say, hey, this X, Y, and Z are going on, because it would be a violation of, they would be revealing classified information. But Udall has done what he can to try to get some attention to the enormous power that the executive branch has amassed in various, in the Patriot Act, in various revisions, to collect information on people and businesses that you know, as they say, as they have said in letters, that ordinary Americans would find shocking.
Denise, there have been so many new revelations day to day, but this week, I guess, the main thing was what the NSA said they were doing and what Senator Udall and some other people said you are not doing.
That's correct. And it's really interesting to me that, you know, to try to justify the program or to justify what they're doing, the NSA has continued to say, well, look, it's so successful. We've been able to stop these many alleged terrorist plots, and they have tried to defend the program. And meanwhile, you have senators like Senator Udall who are privy to this information saying, that's not really true. And so to me, it's fascinating that we have a government agency here that's operating with absolutely no transparency and, frankly, no credibility, because the things they say are under oath aren't even true.
They refer to it sometimes as the shadow factory, I understand. Yeah. Oh my goodness. So there is, at one point, the White House was trying to clarify how this works, and it was like, you know, a big vacuum of stuff, but they know what they're looking for in all that dust. Is that true?
Well, I mean, who knows, right? Yeah. Because because it's secret, but the idea that the government can, you know, with a very, very low threshold, show that they need to access somebody's telephone records, number one, is so problematic for me. But secondly, that they try to defend the program by saying we're only looking at metadata, right? Telephone numbers, how long you talk, from where you're talking to whom you're talking. That actually reveals a great deal of information about people. So for them to say we're only looking at those things, don't worry about it, frankly, worries me a great deal.
It's also galling, I think, that this is a non-adversarial court. But what that means is it's almost like a grand jury. There is no other side being presented. There's no one that represents, you know, the people or privacy interests or the Constitution, for heaven's sakes. It's just the government asking a panel of judges for particular information, and there are apparently lengthy legal justifications or explanations, extrapolations from some of these powers that Congress granted the executive branch in this post 9/11 period. But we don't know no one can challenge them because those are secret too. So it's a very difficult conversation for the American people to have, and there's a lot of irony involved when you understand where the FISA court came from to begin with, and we can talk about that at some point if you want to.
Well, go right ahead. It was a post-Nixon era thing.
It was. It came out of this, what's the so-called Church Committee, Frank Church from Idaho, who headed this committee to look into ways of kind of controlling government secret spying on Americans after some of the Nixon activity was revealed. And the court, it was an effort to provide some oversight for some of these activities, yet to not compromise national security. But now it's being used, and some of the standards that Denise alluded to have been lowered, and so now it's being used to spy on us as opposed to protect us, which is just bizarre when you think about it.
Denise, one aspect of this is how many different communications companies are involved and whether the NSA can just go ask them to turn over things. I guess they have to have a warrant, but it was pretty amazing to see Verizon and all these things that we all use. You know, these are companies that are complying with government requests for information.
Right, and they're required. It's another interesting facet of the lack of transparency, and the telephone company they're not even permitted to say they got a warrant from NSA. So they are prohibited by the statute, by the Patriot Act, to even disclose. They're under a gag order. They can't even tell their customers, I've been asked to turn over your telephone records to this federal agency. And we know of Verizon, of course, being a part of it, and then on the other Patriot Act program, a whole list of internet providers. Mm-hmm. But that's just what we know today, and we know that today because someone told us that information and is now banned from being in the United States. And so who knows what else is out there? We just don't know. And I was going to mention, just to follow up on something that Alicia said, that it's really kind of amazing to me that even the FISA court is sort of secret. Who's on it? How do you get on it? How many of them are there? No. All of that, right? All of it is so, you can ask your regular, normal federal district court judge, you can ask that judge about FISA, and they have no clue themselves. It's amazing to me how it has operated with such an amazing amount of secrecy invading our privacy.
And generally, I think most people are not going to subscribe to conspiracy theories, but it's kind of hard not to in a situation like this, isn't it?
Definitely. And all of it is because there is simply no transparency. And this is a time when I really think that, this is the federal government. The government is always supposed to be open and transparent, and we should be able to observe what it is doing. And instead, it is observing what we are doing, and they're doing it in secrecy.
And as Mark Udall said a few weeks ago on Meet the Press, this isn't an all or nothing proposition. I think things have gotten a little bit out of whack given the powers that were the expanded powers that the FISA court got in the post 9/11 era. And I think it's time to look at bringing some of those powers back just a little bit. He's not advocating a destruction of the system, and neither would I. But I think some checks are in order, and that's how legislation, I think anyway, ought to be aimed.
I think in the testimony that the NSA chief gave to Congress, he said that they had actually prevented some terrorist acts. But I guess there's no way of really knowing if that's true either?
Exactly. I was just going to say that. There's no way to independently verify any of those statements. But secondly, Senator Udall came out right afterwards and said, not true. Not true. That in fact, what the testimony was actually referencing was another Patriot Act program, which is the one that takes internet records of foreign individuals, not American citizens. And thirdly, which I think this is the most important, is that it gives us a false choice between security and privacy, when really, as Senator Udall also said about this, is that there is no if you listen to that testimony carefully, that testimony does not say this is the only way we could have prevented those alleged terrorist plots. That indeed there are other ways in which those terrorist plots could have been prevented. It's just that's the way they do it because they can.
And I think that's one of the keys to all of this, is that some of this information is attainable in other ways,
right?
Ways that are more in keeping with our laws and traditions and Constitution.
I was going to say, frankly, that might actually not violate the Fourth Amendment.
Exactly. And I think, some of the debate that we're having about this doesn't really, I think, fully explore the potential and fully explain why these unprecedented powers are needed.
Exactly. I think that's exactly right. We're given a false choice. Either this approach, or oh my gosh, we're gonna jeopardize our entire national security.
By terrorists, yeah.
And already, in a lot of cases, people are giving up parts of their privacy. Just using social networking. Talk about that bill that you worked on in the legislature.
Well, the bill actually it's intended to protect employees or potential employees so that their bosses or potential employers don't say, hey, let me check out your Facebook account, and being able to go through and look at that, which I think it's important because, there's a lot of talk about how, oh, come on, cell phones, social media, you've given up your privacy. I don't think that's true at all. There might be a certain extent of it to which we have, but we have privacy controls. We don't let just everybody see all of our stuff, and I think that there is still a sense of privacy that we expect. Otherwise, we wouldn't bother to put passwords on our accounts. I mean, there's lots of things that we do to try to protect our our privacy, even in that social network world.
And I do think it's an important point that our voluntary ceding of some of our privacy on certain occasions for certain reasons, because we're willing to trade off to use Facebook or something like that. It's important to keep in mind that these aren't people who have the power to put you in jail.
Right.
Good point.
If you're making that choice that you're going to tell, I don't know, King Soopers because you use their loyalty card or whatever it's called, what you buy every week, you're not telling the government that has, which has the power to, put you in prison.
That's right. Unless you're using one of those cards to buy marijuana later in the year when
although I
it's
don't,
legal.
Yeah, I was going to say that might be okay.
I was fascinated too, Denise, to know that there is a drone in Colorado. There is surveillance being done in Mesa County for some certain information.
Right. They've had a drone in use for a while. They purchased it originally for search and rescue because the county's large, and it was to help in those instances. But in fact, in the 100 and some launches of that drone, I think it's been a small handful, and I actually think it's 2 or 3 instances have been used on search and rescue, and the other launches have been used for other purposes. And what we're concerned about is that drones might be more widespread. As municipalities learn about them, hear about them, the price is not prohibitive. And so what I would like to have our state legislature do is to actually adopt some law that puts some parameters about their use, that there be some probable cause search warrant elements to it if you're going to use it to surveil on Coloradans, and that there be some limits on how you can use that data, how you can share it, how long you can store it. I think there needs to be some parameters around it before law enforcement gets a little bit out of control with them.
So I confess my ignorance on this a little. Can they use this thing to hover and look in your window, for instance?
They could, certainly.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the drones do have that potential, and that's why I think it's important to have the law be clear now before they become more widespread used.
What does Senator Udall think needs to happen at the federal level?
Well, he has introduced, I'm not sure actually at this point if he's introduced it, has he?
I think he has,
a bill with Ron Wyden, and I think it's to that very issue on the standard, is it not?
Correct.
The standard for obtaining a warrant at the FISA court, to essentially strengthen it, to raise it back up, and it's a good idea, I think. Denise is the lawyer here, so she might,
well, that's another
to
aspect here about NSA says, 121 warrants, but then you point out what one warrant can cover.
Right, it can cover a massive amount of individuals' phone records, which multiplied means a massive amount of metadata about what people are doing, who they're calling, how long they talk to them, from where they're calling them, and where the person that they're calling is located. It actually reveals a great deal of information, only if it's, we just issued 1 or 2 warrants today. I think that intends to minimize how grave this problem is.
And the probable cause factor, the NSA can go into this FISA court with a lot less reason for a warrant than you would be able to in a regular court.
Correct. I think the language is something around the lines of a reasonable connection to possible. I mean, it's very, very loose. So it's nowhere near the Fourth Amendment standards, not even close.
I've seen polls in these last couple of weeks that indicates more people than not are kind of like, well, I guess, yeah, we need it for the security. What's the average person headed for here, or what should they be worried about?
Well, I've been surprised, to be honest with you, by those polls. I would have thought that more people would be concerned. And
Privacy is usually a pretty big thing in this country.
it usually is. And I don't know if people, as you say, are just more concerned about terrorists. I mean, I think they should be concerned. I think they should be concerned about this, sort of broad government effort to vacuum up vast bits of the stores of information about our lives. So I've been a little surprised.
And I think in some ways it's how the questions are asked, right? Because that's usually the way that kind of dictates how polls end up. But I think, as I said earlier, we're given a false choice. We're given the choice between sacrificing all of our privacies and leaving them at the door versus being overrun by terrorists. And the fact of the matter is there is something in between. And I think when you ask the question on a personal level, is it okay for the government to get your records on a daily basis and find out all of your comings and goings? We don't really know if that's going to solve a terrorist plot, but we think it might. I think people might have a different reaction, and that poll might vary a little bit depending on how the question is asked.
We have to leave it there, but thank you very much. That is Colorado State of Mind for this weekend. You may see it again or any of our programs at video.rmpbs.org. Next week, we are on the energy beat with the president of the Colorado Oil and Gas Association, Tisha Schuler, among others. I hope you'll join us for that. And thanks for being here for this edition. I'm Cynthia Hessen. Good night.
The Fourth Amendment was not enacted just to protect the innocent. It was enacted to protect all Americans. And I just also think that to me suggests that it's okay if a police officer or an FBI agent, they should just be able to sit outside my home and watch wherever I go, and in fact walk in whenever they want. Well, I'm not doing anything wrong. I mean, that to me that's just a slippery slope to me, that there's no end to that.
Or listen to your conversation in
the kitchen. They could tap, right? Yeah, they could just tap my phone and listen anytime they want to.
It is.
But why would they? I mean, they wouldn't do it to all of us at once, would they?